This video is part 2 of Americans First, a two-part series about Bernie Sanders being president. In part 1, Bernie got the 2016 Democratic nomination and went on to beat Donald Trump. Bernie entered the Oval Office with the most progressive cabinet in US history. In his 4 years, he managed to raise the minimum wage significantly, lowered healthcare costs drastically, made education affordable, and handled COVID-19 well. The far right grew increasingly powerful behind the scenes, but Bernie still managed to defeat Nikki Haley in the 2020 election. But the biggest battles are still ahead. Billionaires and the far right are fighting back hard. And that's not all. Putin is eyeing up Ukraine, and the situation in Palestine will drastically worsen after Hamas attacks Israel in 2023. So how will Bernie Sanders, a quote socialist Jew who doesn't accept AIPAC money, handle these challenges? How will Bernie's second, far more explosive term look like? If you enjoyed part 1, please consider subscribing. There's more to come. The topic of this video was chosen through a Patreon poll, and the next poll winner is already there, which will also be my next video. If you want to take part in future monthly polls and get other exclusive perks, consider joining my Patreon. Bernie Sanders just defeated Nikki Haley in the 2020 election. Americans sent a clear message. Electing Bernie was not a one-time thing, because the other option was Trump. Americans want Bernie's progressive policies. In fact, they want his policies so much they re-elected him after the Democrats already controlled the White House for 12 years, something that rarely happens in US politics. And unlike in 2016, his opponent, aka Nikki Haley, appeared super electable without any major scandals like Trump. Basically, all of traditional media, the majority of Washington, Wall Street and Silicon Valley were on her side. Even MSNBC openly supported her, citing that Bernie's policies would lead to economic instability. But still, Bernie won. Americans have had enough of establishment politicians for good. And not only did Bernie win, both the Senate and House are now controlled by the Democrats too. The Democratic Party has shifted towards progressivism in much the same way the Republicans shifted to right-wing populism in our time. But that doesn't mean the Democratic Party is now Bernie's party. Many Democratic lawmakers are still backed by lobbying interests, most crucially by AIPAC. And those lobbyists really hate Bernie Sanders, and now he just got re-elected. This re-election sends a deep shockwave through elitist circles. Several billionaires published statements attesting that they leave the United States. On November 4th, one day after the election, the stock market drops by a full 8% in the S&P 500. Traditional media begins speaking of a Black Wednesday. Both Fox News and CNN spread economic panic. The elites panic, but the average American is still thriving. On social media, Bernie is celebrated immensely. Videos of Joe Rogan celebrating the election go viral. I know that sounds crazy. Joe Rogan and practically all podcast bros remain Bernie bros. To understand the polarization of this alternate America, we just need to take a look at the media. In our time, things are polarized between the left and right. CNN versus Fox News. In this timeline, polarization is equally high, but it's not between the left and right. It's between the elite establishment and the people. Traditional media, including both CNN and Fox News, versus new media, aka TikTok and podcasts. Large companies, billionaires, Wall Street and Silicon Valley hate Bernie, but regular people, especially college students, love him, and Bernie knows that. At his re-election speech, he vows, "I'm not your typical politician. I won't put the interests of investors, shareholders, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, or even the interests of my fellow politicians first. I will put one thing, and one thing only first. I'll put the interests of the American people first. I will put Americans first." President Bernie is now in a far more powerful position than during his first term. The House and Senate are both firmly blue. His pandemic victory gives him backwind, and perhaps most crucially, something I forgot to mention during the first part. Just like Trump in our timeline, Bernie was able to replace 3 Supreme Court judges. He of course picked 3 progressive judges, making the Supreme Court firmly democratic. For those of you who are curious, I think he'd pick Goodwin Liu, Nina Pillard and Leah Littman. And with his newfound powers, Bernie begins a revived push for universal healthcare, called called Medicare for All 2.0. But Bernie isn't all powerful. Weeks after his re-election, the stock market is down by almost 15% and economic fearmongering works against him. Thanks to a Herculean effort by healthcare lobbying firms, several Democratic senators block Medicare for All 2.0. The public is outraged, and the Democratic senators who voted against it, like Chuck Schumer, see drastic drops in their ratings. Democrats begin to notice one thing: either they jump on the Bernie train or they won't get re-elected. This forces them to find a middle ground, and by December 2020 a public option compromise is found. Healthcare is not yet free for everyone, but crippling medical bills are a thing of the past. Certain blue states like California, Hawaii, Vermont and Oregon begin pushing for full universal healthcare within their state. The United States enters 2021 with loads of uncertainty. The pandemic is still going on, but measurements against it are working. Infection rates in the US are similar to European countries like Germany and the UK. Economic panic is still growing, especially thanks to fearmongering in traditional media. Even MSNBC warns of a Bernie recession, so Bernie can't really ignore the economy. But luckily for him, his policies like cheaper healthcare, green infrastructure investments and quick COVID recovery are actually good for the economy, just not immediately. Throughout January and February, the stock market stabilizes itself. COVID recovery is strong, leading to earlier spikes, and consumer spending actually rises thanks to better wages and higher debt reliefs. The logic is simple really. If Americans have more money to spend, they'll spend more money. And thanks to Bernie's policies, they have more money. Big businesses, traditional media, and even Silicon Valley have to reckon with the fact that Bernie's policies work for the most part. MSNBC quietly stops talking about Bernie and the recession. Even CNN softens their anti-Bernie tone significantly. But the far right doesn't back down so easily. Fox News and right-wing media funded by billionaires portray him as a dictator. Tucker Carlson views CNN and MSNBC backing down as them bowing to America's Stalin. MSNBC's and CNN's ratings plummet. Moderates are forced to choose. Either they jump on the Bernie train or jump on the anti-Bernie train. By this point, there really isn't a middle ground anymore. But behind the scenes of America's increasing polarization, another crisis is quickly approaching. By April 2021, Russia masses over 100,000 troops near the Ukrainian border and in Crimea, and the international community is highly concerned. In our timeline, Biden met Putin in a summit in June, resulting in Russia partially pulling back, only to then, a few months later, pull back in and fully invade. Back then, analysts, most world leaders and even Zelensky himself were convinced that Russia won't invade. It just seemed too crazy, like too much of a gamble. Russia stands to lose too much, they said. Of course, they were all wrong. I ultimately believe that Putin was already locked in on his decision to invade should the West not fully appease him and abandon Ukraine's NATO ambitions. And I just don't see how Bernie would fully bow down to Putin, especially since a big part of his whole agenda is an anti-oligarchy stance. Bernie and Putin are like dream arch-nemesis, an American socialist versus a Russian oligarch. So things between Bernie and Putin unfold similarly to how they unfolded between Biden and Putin. They meet, Putin partially pulls back, only to fully commit in October. By November 2021, Russia has over 120,000 troops amassed, alongside armored units, artillery and logistical support. Everything you need for an invasion. The CIA estimates that Russia will invade by early 2022 with around 175,000 troops. They even share possible attack plans with Zelensky. But still, most world leaders, including Zelensky and European leaders, don't believe Russia will invade. By late December, Bernie begins arming Ukraine and Zelensky is briefed. Bernie is even more committed to defend Ukraine than Biden was. And Biden in our time made one strategic mistake when handling the Ukraine war. Biden made it clear early on that the US will not defend Ukraine directly, giving away one crucial negotiation card America held. Bernie doesn't commit that mistake. Instead, he employs strategic ambiguity. His support for Ukraine is very strong and his anti-Putin rhetoric is harsh. Nobody, not Putin, not the European leaders, not Zelensky, and not even the American people know for certain if Bernie would use American troops to defend Ukraine. To make his ambiguity more effective, Bernie stations several US troops in close by NATO allies like Poland, Turkey and the Baltics. American ships increase presence in the Baltic Sea, and American planes make their way to bases in Germany and Poland. By late January, many Americans begin to panic. Fox News and the far right are pushing fear-mongering campaigns that Bernie is starting World War III. Tucker Carlson claims Bernie wants war with Russia to stay in power forever. In many states, right-wing groups begin massive anti-Bernie, anti-war protests. Bernie's approval rating drops down to 48%. Many on the left actually like Bernie's harsher stance. He's not bowing down to Putin, he's standing up against tyranny. With the possibility of direct US involvement still in play, the tables are now turned. This time, it's not the West that has to calculate if Putin will actually invade. Instead, Putin has to calculate if Bernie is actually committed to send US troops to Ukraine. Ultimately, it's impossible to know what Putin would do given these circumstances. I would need to look into his brain to give you a concrete answer, and unfortunately, I can't do that. But I'm still confident in what I think Putin would do. Invading Ukraine with the possibility of US involvement is outright stupid. It's lunatic, insane and irrational. But so was invading Ukraine. Countless experts didn't believe Putin would invade. Practically every European leader was convinced there was a diplomatic option left. But Putin still invaded. In this timeline, the decision to invade seems even crazier, but Putin still invades. February 18, 2022. Tanks and armored vehicles make their way into Ukraine, rapidly advancing. Bernie Sanders' gamble of strategic ambiguity has not paid off. He couldn't deter Putin from invading, and now Bernie has a decision to make. How much does he commit to defending Ukraine? The answer is not that much more than Biden. Bernie still has largely the same military advisors as Biden, and while he sees defending Ukraine as crucial, he also doesn't want to start World War III. Financially, the US is in a much better spot in this timeline. Trump's first term never slowed economic growth. Instead, under Bernie, the Obama economy continued to perform well. Really, it's just like Trump said.
That the economy does better under the Democrats than the Republicans.
In our timeline, Biden announced on March 16 a $800 million Ukraine defense package that will be delivered within 1 week. In this timeline, Bernie announces on March 10 that he will send $1.25 billion worth of equipment to Ukraine within the next week. This strong commitment to Ukraine's defense now actually helps Bernie's approval rating. The American people see him as someone standing up against tyranny while not risking American lives directly. On the battlefield, the war evolves similarly than in our timeline. Thanks, in part, but not exclusively to American intelligence, Ukraine manages to defend Kiev and fend off the 40-mile military convoy. The war quickly evolves from a Russian blitz into trench warfare. Russia is now forced to grind Ukraine down, not steamroll it like Putin hoped. And with even more American aid, Ukraine is halting the Russians back even harder. But that increased aid doesn't only have advantages. For one, some European allies, particularly Germany, feel less pressured to support Ukraine. And even more crucially, the insane numbers Bernie is pouring into Ukraine work as propaganda fuel against him. Like in our time, the far right argues that this money would have been better spent on America. Anti-Ukraine talking points about tax dollars being wasted worked so well because the average American was not doing very well. In this timeline, the economic situation of most Americans is drastically better, and thus talking points about wasted tax dollars simply don't hit as hard. Pretty much public sentiments about Ukraine are quite similar in this timeline compared to ours. But the Ukraine war really isn't the biggest battle Bernie has to fight. The most crucial battle remains the class war. Large companies and billionaires spend unprecedented amounts of money in anti-Bernie campaigns. They buy advertisements, fund anti-Bernie far-right influencers, and begin lobbying for far-right politicians. The goal of the elites is to take back the House and Senate by 2022. That midterm election is kinda their last shot. They really need the House and Senate back so they can begin blocking many of Bernie's more radical proposals. Universal free income, a $20 minimum wage, inheritance tax, That's every CEO's nightmare. Every billionaire in America has now pretty much the same goal, but they're not deploying a united strategy. Every billionaire and major company is kind of fighting for its own interests. Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg fund right-wing Republican candidates and covertly donate heavily to Tucker Carlson's Fox News segment. More moderate billionaires opt to fund anti-Bernie Democratic candidates like Chuck Schumer. And then there's one guy who goes a bit overboard. Arguably America's most radical billionaire.
This is Elon Musk.
He set his eyes on a certain platform for a while now. In our timeline, Elon bought Twitter for $44 billion in October of 2022. He then, as you all know, used it to push for his agenda and help Trump get re-elected. In this timeline, October 2022 would be too late. Musk is beginning to plan his takeover in June of 2021. But this time, the battle is far harder for him. FTC and DOJ antitrust officials under Bernie are far stricter than they were under Biden. That makes it harder for Musk to liquidate $44 billion needed for the takeover. With some clever planning, while staying low-key about the takeover, Musk might have been able to pull it off. But Elon Musk is not the brightest candle. In July 2021, he publicly announces his plans to buy Twitter, which leads to a far bigger controversy than in our timeline. Public sentiments about billionaires in this timeline are tragically different than in ours. People see Musk as a tech monopolist, the exact thing so many voted against when electing Bernie 2 times. Musk's announcement leads to a massive backlash. Thanks to Bernie's pro-union stance, unions have much more power in the US. Twitter's employees rally government allies to fight Musk's purchase, citing fears over layoffs, deregulation of content moderation, and union-busting tendencies. Yet, Twitter executives still start rounds of negotiation with Musk. At the same time, a full-scale legal battle ensues, quickly further straining Musk's time and assets, and the public is slowly turning against him. The idea of a single billionaire owning the public square is terrifying to many Americans. People begin to boycott Tesla products and small protests erupt in front of Tesla dealerships. But it's not just the people and unions fighting back against Musk's takeover. The president is fighting too. Bernie pushes a bill through Congress that tightens social media regulations drastically. Platforms that don't manage to fight against hate speech and disinformation now get punished severely. Bernie argued that the bill is there in case Musk manages to take over Twitter. But in reality, Bernie uses the Twitter feud as a cover to pass harsh bills and executive orders that cut the powers of monopolistic social media companies drastically. Facebook and Instagram, owned by another staunch Bernie enemy, Mark Zuckerberg, are now regulated more strictly. Bernie also cuts several SpaceX contracts the company had with the White House, slashing the company's value by 16%. Now Elon Musk's two biggest assets took direct hits. His public asset Tesla took a big hit because people began boycotting Teslas, and his private company SpaceX took a big hit because the White House slashed funding for his space program. 2021 is the first year in many where Elon Musk's net worth actually decreased. And on August 3rd, Twitter employees begin a full strike demanding the Musk takeover negotiations to end immediately. At first, Twitter executives ignore the strike. But after Twitter is forced to shut down temporarily, executives begin negotiating with the strike leaders. On August 10, Twitter formally declines Musk's offer and the strike ends. Elon Musk has failed. The people have won. But things don't de-escalate. Quite the opposite. Unions and the people just learned how much power they truly hold. Traditional media escalates its rhetoric further. Fox News claims that America is now in a Bernie Sanders-led socialist dictatorship. They cite Bernie's involvement in Musk failing to buy Twitter. Tucker Carlson claims that soon Americans won't be able to buy cars without Bernie's approval. CNN and MSNBC meanwhile hold programs questioning how Bernie's newly passed social media regulations expand the government's powers and limit free speech. And the whole Twitter feud only further radicalizes billionaires. They pour further and further amounts into anti-Bernie campaigns and lobbying firms like AIPAC. On social media, countless influencers notice this pattern and begin making reports on it. Think hour-long YouTube essays and dedicated Joe Rogan episodes. Younger Americans that engage more heavily with social media are fully aware about the upper class's attempt to influence upcoming elections against them, but older generations that still mainly consume traditional media owned by large companies is ever increasingly convinced that Bernie is establishing a socialist dictatorship. Tucker Carlson, for one, claims that it's only a matter of time before Bernie uses the military against American civilians. The upcoming midterms seem more and more like a final battle of the classes. What will win the election, money or people? President Sanders decides that the ultimate decision should lie with the people and not billionaires or monopolies. Behind the scenes, he pleads with the Supreme Court for one massive ruling. With the help of his progressive cabinet, he presents a massive case detailing how Elon Musk spent over $60 million so far on midterm candidates through covert channels. In our timeline, the Supreme Court overturned one historic ruling in 2022, Roe v. Wade. In this timeline, the Supreme Court overturns something of similar scale, but it's not about abortion. On June 6, 2022, the Supreme Court overturns Citizens United. Basically, Citizens United allows corporations and unions to spend unlimited amounts of money on political ads, which obviously is not very healthy for a democracy and allows things like super PACs to heavily influence US elections. And now if you think, why would the Supreme Court overturn something like this? Isn't the Supreme Court super conservative? It is in our timeline, but in this timeline, Bernie was able to replace 3 Supreme Court judges, making the Supreme Court firmly progressive. Now, with Citizens United overturned, a lot of the political ad campaigns countless billionaires and large corporations have run are illegal. Bernie's Department of Justice cracks down hard against them, resulting in historically low political spending during the midterms. The sudden lack of funding leaves several anti-Bernie campaigns out to dry. In November 2022, the American people vote in the first election since 2010 where there's a spending limit on political ad campaigns. That change is significant, but it doesn't negate the populist anti-Bernie movement. Their fear-mongering still works. The Republicans managed to take back the Senate with a 3-seat lead, but fail to take back the House. Bernie has lost his trifecta, but he was able to hold off the red populist wave threatening his power. After the midterms, progressives breathe a sigh of relief. The first half of 2023 evolves without any major upsets. The class war, as many call it now, is still ongoing. Tucker Carlson is still shouting on Fox News about the Stalin in the White House, and the Ukraine war is still an utter stalemate. And just as things seem to quiet down for once, on October 7, Hamas attacks Israel. As a Jew himself, President Sanders strongly condemns the attack. But unlike Biden, he doesn't give Netanyahu a blank check. He stresses that retaliation must not cross humanitarian lines. Initially, that response sounds grounded and fair, but only weeks after October 7, once the initial shock fades, many begin to realize that Israel's response is shaping up to be unnecessarily cruel. The left immediately begins flaring up anti-Israel sentiments and quickly points out that Israel has been oppressing Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank for decades. Bernie is now slowly faced with a dilemma. The Squad, student activists and unions demand Bernie to stop US complicity in Israel's inhumane actions. They see Gaza as a class and human rights issue, but at the same time, AIPAC and Congress mount massive pressure to stand fully behind Israel. Some Dems break with Bernie, echoing pro-Israel talking points. Bernie travels to Israel to meet with Netanyahu, only to quickly find out that the two share practically no common ground. Bernie urges Netanyahu to show restraint, but Netanyahu responds by asking how Bernie, as a Jew himself, can defend Hamas. The meeting ends in failure and US-Israel relations quickly begin to strain. The public splits on the issue. By November, a month after the start of the war, Bernie's approval rating is at its lowest point in history. Fox News, CNN and even MSNBC have found a new attack angle against him. He's not standing behind Israel, not unconditionally. Americans question why Bernie is trying to force Israel to act cautiously when they have just been so brutally attacked. To many, this is like the post-9/11 debate all over again. How much does this brutal act justify in retaliation? Bernie tries to negotiate with Netanyahu by threatening to withdraw military aid, but Congress remains committed to support Israel. Several Democrats completely betray Bernie in favor of Netanyahu. The public sentiment for the first time during his second term is not on Bernie's side. Most moderates, and of course everyone further to the right, views his hesitation to support Israel as weak foreign policy. On Fox News, Bernie is not just a communist anymore, he's a pro-terror communist. Tucker Carlson points out that he not only doesn't commit to Israel's defense, but he also withdrew from Afghanistan. Tucker begins shouting the following: Bernie Sanders is the president of terrorism. Whether it be the Taliban or Hamas, he just loves terrorists. That moment gets clipped countless times and goes viral in right-wing circles. It goes so far that even CNN shows the infamous Tucker outburst. It seems like the right wing is winning the battle of public opinion for once. But Bernie still has one advantage. Bernie Sanders is a Jew. That automatically gives his words about the conflict more weight. In January 2024, by which Israel's brutal campaign has escalated significantly, Bernie addresses Americans, American Jews to be specific. He explains in calm, simple words that every bomb that destroys the home of a Palestinian child also threatens the security of Jews around the world. In order for Jews to be safe, Palestinians need to be safe too. That last quote is shared on the internet countless times. That public address marks the first time where public sentiment seems to begin to shift. But it doesn't take long for the right to clap back again. CNN publishes an article: if Bernie wants Jews to be safe, why doesn't he protect Israel? The whole Israel-Palestine debate turns into a left versus right issue. Either you're pro-Palestine or pro-Israel. And that whole deal is kinda new in this timeline's America. So far, polarization has been up versus down, the people versus the elites. Now, thanks to the conflict, the political debate shifts from a class war question towards a culture war question. And that is a serious advantage for the far right. For a long time, especially after the 2022 midterms and the overturn of Citizens United, it looked like the Republicans had little to no chance of winning the class war. But now they might not even need to, if they can just win the culture war. Billionaires and Republicans go all in on the issue. Google shows search bars with Israeli flags, and social media platforms owned by Mark Zuckerberg heavily restrict anti-Israel content. In our time, when you scroll through Instagram, it's not hard to find crazy conspiracy theories about Israel. In this timeline, such content is taken down quickly. But people find ways around censorship, and many Americans also begin seeing the plot to use the Israel-Palestine debate as a front used by billionaires to repress progressive policies. But the class war and the newfound Israel-centered culture war aren't the only battles taking place in America. The primaries are in full effect now. Both the Republicans and Democrats have to choose their candidate. Bernie Sanders quickly puts his weight behind his vice president Elizabeth Warren, and the progressive movement quickly accepts her. But several establishment Democrats and lobbyists have a different idea. They want an AIPAC-friendly anti-Bernie candidate. They mainly pull their weight behind two candidates. Pete Buttigieg presents himself as a kind of Obama 2.0. He's the hope against Warren, a safer option backed by traditional media and AIPAC. And there's another third option, the I told you so option. Hillary Clinton is trying to make her political comeback. Her AIPAC backing is even greater than Buttigieg's, and she has more name recognition. But her talking points are noticeably less Israel-focused than Buttigieg's. She rather tries to go down the populist route, taking note from Republican politicians. During the primary debates, Bernie's approval just barely stays above 50%, but the economy is still doing well, making Hillary's talking points weak. By March 2024, she drops out and endorses Pete Buttigieg, who is now battling it out with Elizabeth Warren. And Pete kinda makes a big mistake. He could try to write the unifying candidate run, but instead he tries too much to reason why America needs to support Israel. Unfortunately for him, the right is slowly losing the culture war centered around Israel. Initially, they dominated it, but with every hospital that gets bombed, every child that's seen starving, and every reporter that passes, Israel is seen in a less favorable light. and Warren calls Pete out hard. She points at his AIPAC funding and then talks about child casualties and how Pete cares more about money than the lives of innocent children. And since Citizens United is still overturned, lobbyist firms like AIPAC simply don't have the same power they used to. Elizabeth Warren secures the Democratic nomination comfortably. The Republican primaries look quite different. There's Josh Hawley receiving the most backing by established Republicans. There's Liz Cheney acting as the anti-populist conservative. And in all honesty, these two aren't strong candidates at all. Josh Hawley is a Christian nationalist with like 1/10 of Trump's charisma in a timeline that rejected Trump. And Liz Cheney simply is a politician from a bygone time. But they're still the strongest two candidates I could find. The traditional candidates, Hawley and Cheney, are in fact so weak and uninspiring that the party's base, radicalized by years of anti-Bernie rhetoric, demands their most prominent ideological leader to run. And their most prominent ideological leader is not a politician. It's a person I've mentioned in this video several times already. He's the voice of the right, the loudest critic of Bernie Sanders, the only person left that can truly inspire the right wing, Tucker Carlson. His fans, who in this timeline are even bigger in numbers and more religiously on his side, demand him to run. They want him to go low to finally break the Democrats from their 16-year-long reign of power. And that's exactly what Tucker does during the primaries. He goes low, he drags Josh Hawley and Liz Cheney through the dirt and quickly emerges as the Republican nominee. And not only does he win the primaries, he dominates them. The GOP is now the Tucker party, and the 2024 election is set. Elizabeth Warren versus Tucker Carlson, a progressive woman versus the far-right populist. Elizabeth Warren carries the torch of Bernie's mostly successful 8-year presidency. And while the Democrats ruled, the Republican Party collapsed in on itself. And that's why the only chance the grand old party has left is to go all out. And Tucker Carlson will go all out for them. He'll play dirty, drag Warren through the mud, and try his very best to make Americans angry. After learning that Warren got the nomination, Tucker goes on Fox News to shout into the camera, "We cannot elect this woman. She's the devil incarnate, the Antichrist. She will destroy America. Bernie Sanders was America's Lenin, but Elizabeth Warren will be America's Stalin." And with that, I end this two-part series. Bernie's reign is over, but what follows after him, you have to decide. A continuation of progressivism or the full power of right-wing populism. Feel free to argue in the comments. I'll also hold a community poll shortly after this video releases to see who you think would win this alternate 2024 election. With that said, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell. There's much more to come. Just like this video, the topic of the next video was decided through a Patreon poll. If you want to take part in future polls and help me keep making videos like this one, consider joining my Patreon. As always, a special thanks to the legends who already support me on Patreon. They've chosen this topic and it's been an absolute blast to make. So thank you for supporting me and thank you for choosing the topic of this video.